Hello and welcome to another edition of BNEWS In Depth. I'm your host, Rich Hosford. This week we are delving into a heated debate around a ballot question that will be before voters during the town election on April 6. It asks whether the treasurer or tax collector should remain as an elected position or become an appointed spot by the Board of Selectmen. Those in favor of the change say that the complexity of the position has grown during the 40-plus years its current occupant, Brian Curtin, has been in office, and that the town needs a professional to ensure a smooth transition and continued operation. Those opposed, including Curtin himself, say keeping the position elected provides necessary independence and autonomy, and that making it appointed gives too much power to the Board of Selectmen. We'll have an in-depth discussion with representatives of both sides. But first, we go to my conversation with Town Clerk Amy Warfield for the background of how this ballot question came to be and what voters need to know before heading to the polls.
And I am joined now by Town Clerk Amy Warfield, who's going to go over just sort of the basic mechanics of how we got here and what each vote, or a yes or a no vote on this issue will mean. So, Amy, thank you for joining me. Appreciate you coming in and giving a little bit of your time and expertise.
No problem. Thank you.
So the first thing, I just want to know, a big picture, how did we get to where we are today? We're a ballot question before the town.
Good. Well, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, the Selectmen had put together the Government Review Study Committee.
Yep.
And so they were looking at how government works and what needs to possibly be adjusted or refined or changed. The last time that something like that had been done in Burlington is kind of back in the 70s. So really just kind of taking a look at that. And then they came up with a couple of proposals, one of which was maybe looking at some of the elected positions and should those be appointed. There is a trend to convert a number of positions from elected to appointed, so I think that was kind of where that study committee got kind of the idea for it, or the going for it.
A trend in the state.
A trend in the state, yeah. Mainly because positions have gotten a little more complex, and maybe they feel that the model that was good for 200 years now needs to be adjusted.
And the whole thing about the show is we'll have both sides of that debating it out. But so then, what happened? There was a town meeting vote, correct?
Correct. Yeah. The procedure that's spelled out in Mass General Law tells us how they have to kind of go through it. So it needs to be, the ballot question needs to be put forward by town meeting to be able to be put onto the ballot. And so that's the vote that was taken back in September. And then we're at the point where now it's going to be on the ballot. And
I guess what kind of regulations or rules, like where does it come from that this has to be a ballot question?
Again, it's spelled out in Mass General Law.
Okay.
So there is a specific segment that talks about converting from an elected position to an appointed position.
So people have the option to vote either just yes or no. It's pretty simply laid out in the ballot. Yeah. We've seen the sample ballots just got released. So let's just go through the two options. What would a no vote do?
Well, a no vote would do nothing. It wouldn't change the status that we have. The treasurer collector position would continue to be elected just like it has always been. So that doesn't really change anything.
Right.
And currently there is one person on the ballot running for that position. So it would be presumed that they would then gain the position for another 3-year term.
Right.
The yes vote would be that it would then become an appointed position. The person who has won the race would hold that position, and the selectmen have the responsibility of then hiring and appointing someone. They can do it as soon as 3 weeks from the election, or they have up to 2 years to do it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they can allow the person who has been elected, who's been the treasurer collector for a number of years here,
Sure.
to continue to hold that position. The appointment, again, by Mass General Law, would be a 3-year appointment.
Okay, so then,
3 years, up to 3 years, I should say.
so up to 3 years, and then it would then be possibly a reappointment, or is it just like,
Yeah.
currently they could be reelected?
Right. It really becomes just like any of the other appointed positions. For instance, our town administrator, the police chief, the fire chief, the DPW supervisor. All of those positions are appointed or hired. And so this particular position just has the stipulation that it can be up to a 3-year position. So they would then make a contract with that person, and that could always be renewed if they're pleased with who they have, or if they wanted to do it for a 1-year term and see whether they like the person that they've hired, then it could be a 1-year contract.
Okay. And while they're getting through the process of appointing that first person, the person who won the election would
Continue to serve.
Continue
Yeah.
to serve
Yeah.
during that time.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that's all the basics, right? People
Yeah.
will see it on the ballot. That'll be laid out for them,
Yeah.
nice and clear.
And the summary will also be there.
Yeah.
And also, because we have a state statute that requires us to notify the voters about any ballot questions, around the 18th of March, they will go out to all households that have a registered voter a postcard that will have the summaries also broken down. So it's a little bit like the state sending out the voter information booklet.
Yep.
We can do it in a smaller form because we only have one question that has to be on that. But so people should be looking for that in the mail that week of the March 18th. That'll be coming out. Give them a chance to read through it and see what the two sides, the pro and the con side, have to say. As you've already mentioned, the sample ballots are out and available, and they're on the website and out through the newspaper and that type of thing as well.
Yep, we're going to have it up on our site this afternoon.
Good.
So, that's all the questions, but since I have you here, I can't let you go without just giving a pitch. When's the election?
Sure.
All the basics. What do
Yeah.
people need to know?
Yeah, the election is April 6th. It'll be at Burlington High School. In the high school gym, as always. The polls will be open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. The other thing is that absentee ballots are going to be available next week, but if people want to, they can go online to the website, download the absentee ballot application, get that mailed in if they're not available to make the polls on April 6th, and we'll mail out the absentee ballots to them as well. Absentee ballots can be picked up, or you can vote absentee in the office until noontime on April 5th.
And that Friday.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Well,
Very
thank
good.
you.
Well, thank you very much.
Sure.
I appreciate you coming in and giving us, a good starting spot for this conversation.
Good. Thank you.
So that's the basics. We go now to my conversation with the yes to make this an appointed position side. I was joined by town meeting member and former town moderator Sally Willard, town meeting member Eileen Sickler, and Board of Selectmen member Bob Hogan. Let's take a look.
Welcome back. I am now joined by the pro side. I have town meeting member and former town moderator Sally Willard, town meeting member Eileen Sickler, and Selectman Bob Hogan. Thank you all for joining me.
Thanks for having
Thank you
us.
for having us.
So I just want to open it up, kind of let it start from the beginning. How did this come about?
Well, when I first got on the board 9 years ago, there was an initial discussion about it back then. But recently, when Brian had mentioned that he was retiring, I thought, well, here's the perfect time for us to readdress the discussion of making the treasurer-collector position an appointed position, because you don't want to do it when someone has won an election. Even if we waited 3 years, that's a long time. So I thought I would ask the Board of Selectmen to address this, to put it on for a town meeting vote, which was the second step. The second step then was the town meeting overwhelmingly approved it going to the town ballot. And I'm sure Amy has mentioned that the process is that it automatically goes to the ballot if the town meeting approves it. So on April 6th, there will be this question on the ballot for people to look for and to vote on. And we are here to talk about the yes to appoint the treasurer-collector position.
Right. So I get, it's a good timing, if the guy who's been in it for decades is leaving. But why do it? What are some of the arguments as to why you think it's important to make this change?
Well, I guess there's a couple of reasons. My background is in finance, and one of the things that's important to me is reporting. And right now, with the elected position, the treasurer collector, that position reports to the citizens, the voters,
right,
as they would. But practically, that's a tough thing to do. I mean, it's not as though the voters are asking for reports or, progress updates, or or that this person, the treasurer collector, is coming out and giving periodic reports and whatnot. Versus if you hire someone, especially in that senior position, then they're going to report to not only the Board of Selectmen, but to the town, to the voters. But with going to the Board of Selectmen, there'll be public meetings, and so the voters will be able to go listen to the treasurer collector and ask for reports and have it in a very visible, transparent sort of way. So I come at it with reporting, but there are several reasons.
Okay.
And at this point, Brian's been in the job for 43 years.
Right.
He's grown with the position. He's grown as the budget has grown from $20 million to, I think next year's budget is $150 million. And that's money that we receive. Whenever there's cash sitting there, it has to be invested. The treasurer is responsible for that. And at this point in time, we have a very experienced treasurer collector. But going forward, if the next treasurer is elected, we could have a number of qualified people on the ballot. If the one unqualified person is elected, or someone who doesn't have any financial background is elected, then that person has to start from the beginning. And you wouldn't, as one town meeting member said, you wouldn't hire the CFO of an organization this size off the street. You would do some research and some interviewing and try to find the person who was best qualified for the position. Municipal finance today is not what it was 40 years ago. We have a AAA rating, which, to Brian's credit, that has a lot to do with his fiscal management. But going forward, it would be terrible if someone unqualified who really didn't know anything about government finance were to come in and make a really big mistake simply because they didn't have experience. And that could be disastrous for the town.
I think one of the big issues would be a disaster like that could cause us to lose our AAA rating.
Right.
And with the amount of bonds that we have out there and the financing, that could be $1 million crisis for us.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of things that could go wrong, but the AAA bonding would be certainly one of them. And Brian, right here doing an interview with you when he first announced that he was retiring, indicated that the job has become more complicated, that there is more work, and that the intensity of $145 million budget has to be addressed in a more keenly aware financially situation by someone who knows what they're doing. And there's no guarantee an election can do that.
But I think what the other side might say is that that's exactly what an election is supposed to do. It's supposed to be a vetting process. Each candidate makes their argument, talks about their experience. What makes you kind of doubt the fact that that voters would choose the right person for the job?
Sure. And I'll jump in afterwards. but yeah.
Okay, sure. This position hasn't been contested in 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
And with not just this position, but so many in town, if you're elected, there are no contests. And just the fact that it's been 35 years, that this has been uncontested, I think goes to the point of it's a popularity contest, and there may be qualified people out there, but so far they haven't shown their face. And by hiring someone, we can look outside Burlington, as most corporations this size would, in terms of hiring a
Expand
professional.
the search.
Yeah.
A couple of things. We're a pretty smart community, but I want to ask the people who are watching this, how much do they really know and understand about what the treasurer collector does and what they're voting on, even if they had someone else to vote for? I think the job is so complicated. We know about it because we're kind of in it.
Right.
But there's a lot of people who just don't understand what's going on in the office, only because it is so complicated. And when you talk about having a vetting process every 3 years, how much vetting have we been doing this election process so far? It's easy to say that the public should have the right to vote, and I'm for that. But if you look at what the State Department of Revenue, Department of Local Services talks about, they say that if a position is a policy position, those positions should be
Appointed.
elected.
Yeah, policy should be elected.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But if it's an organizational, like a treasurer collector, it should be appointed. Because they have very specific things they have to do. So whether town meeting, board of selectmen, school committee, I mean, we have a variety of things we can bring to the table when we're running. But if you're running for a seat like the treasurer collector, there are very specific things that have to be done and your qualifications have to be in line. And there's no guarantee that that's going to happen when somebody runs.
Right, and we wouldn't vote for the town accountant, which is the other major financial position in town. You wouldn't vote for, have someone run and have that be a popularity contest. And that's in large part, that's what elections become, especially if there are 5 or 10 people, 5 people on the ballot and no one is the incumbent. In any election, whether it's a local, state, or federal, incumbents are rarely opposed.
Right.
And so, 35 years without an opponent. Well, now Brian decides to retire, and all of a sudden you open it up. There's no guarantee that even the people who might be qualified because they have financial experience are going to bother running, because in local politics, it's often just a popularity contest.
Now, I think, the other argument would be that there are, Burlington does have quite a big population of people in the financial services. So, would you see a benefit of having somebody who's sort of invested in the town because they're a resident here as being, like that being a plus for, selection?
I don't.
You don't?
I don't either. No,
Okay.
I come at it sort of as a transactional a way. That is, everything that the town does here, all the transactions that goes through that go through the treasurer collector's office, it's no different than any other town. Really, and you get a professional in here, and they're going to be vested not only in the job but also the community. I don't know that living here really makes a difference. Again, to me, and again, I'm an accountant, auditor, so and so. A transaction is a transaction, and it doesn't matter if you live down the street or if the person lives 50 miles away. It's the same handling, it's the same transaction, same processing, and hopefully those controls are in place. But I'll stop there. But anyway.
And I just want to point out that in addition to the town accountant, the auditor is part of that financial team, and he's hired by the assessors, the assessor, not the auditor. And if you take a look at who the department heads are in town, you've got a great police chief, a great town accountant, a great town administrator, firefighter. Burlington has a lot of very qualified department heads, none of whom live in Burlington. You can go right down the line on how many people actually live outside of town who come here and are committed to the town, to doing the right thing. And there's a hiring process that they go through. And you know, we hire good people in town, whether it's the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Health, the school department. We feel that we could do a good job in recruiting and hiring a treasurer collector to do what's in the town's best interest, even if they're not from Burlington.
And it will be, the process is not just, okay, Board of Selectmen, you know, submit your resume to the Board of Selectmen, but there are organizations out there, the Collins Center at Northeastern, the Mass Municipal Association, and they have, they provide help to cities and towns who are trying to hire professionals. So one of those organizations or someone similar to them will do the initial vetting, and then a townwide committee will, representatives from different parts of local government and from the community will then review and interview, and then it will be, the final step will be to bring the candidates before the Board of Selectmen on TV in open session to do the final interviews. And from there, the decision will be made. So it's not as if we're going to simply perpetuate a buddy system, which some people have said, well, geez, won't they just hire whoever their friends are from the community? I said, no, it's a process that's going to be open to qualified candidates based on a set of requirements. And those candidates could come from Worcester, or they could come from someplace else. They could also come from Burlington.
Right. It's just so it would be kind of like the way that recently the town hired the new town accountant to replace Paul Sagarino, who's now
And
the
the town administrator. We
Yeah.
did the same thing for the town administrator position when we hired Paul.
Right.
And Rich, to your point about finance, yes, a number of people here in Burlington, I'm sure, have strong finance backgrounds. But I think this is a niche. I mean, it's not okay. You know, debits, credits. I could do that. But I mean, this is something very specific in terms of the treasurer collector and what they do. And I don't think it's just because you have a finance background, you know, that you would be qualified, frankly.
Now, if Burlington were to make this decision and make this point, it would not be the first community in Massachusetts to do so. As you've sort of, prepared for this, have you looked at other towns that have made this switch? What have you found?
There have been 24, since 2014, there have been 24 communities that have changed over to an appointed position. The most recent one that we're aware of is Arlington.
Right.
Right, that was last year.
Right.
The incumbent treasurer retired, and on the very last day that he could take out papers, a fellow, Dean Carmen, he's a CPA, he said, well, I'm going to jump in and take this on. And he did, but his goal was to bring in someone that was qualified. So he was the one that pushed for it. He said, you really need, even though there's staff here and they're fully capable of helping someone, the treasurer really needs to be qualified. They need to have some municipal experience. You can't just bring in a CPA. I was the controller for a startup company, and you wouldn't want me to be in here managing a $140 or $150 million in receipts and doing that cash management.
Also, I mean, Bob mentioned 24 towns just in the last 4 or 5 years transitioning over, and cumulatively it's about 80–85% of towns. So people recognize that the voters really aren't in the best position to elect this person just because of what's required, and that's really more important to hire someone who's qualified and has the credentials and experience.
Now, I think one of the the strongest points maybe that the other side has is that the current occupant of the position, Brian Curtin himself, thinks that this should remain an elected position. And one of his arguments is that he's concerned that the position will sort of lose a bit of independence if it's appointed, through the selectmen or even through that process. His argument, I think, is right now he's accountable just to the residents of Burlington. He's not beholden to the Board of Selectmen or anyone else in town government. Do you feel that, or do you have any concerns about losing that independence?
No, I don't have that, because the Board of Selectmen don't interfere with other department heads who, like the town accountant, the town administrator. They have a job to do. We don't call them up every day and say, do this or do that. They have a job to do. There would be no interference from the Board of Selectmen. As any of the department heads, they have their responsibilities and they know what it is they need to do. So to imply that that there would be no accountability, I disagree. I think the selectmen allow the department heads to do their job without interference. I would also say that being in this particular situation, being responsive to the electorate is something that should be done anyway. It shouldn't be just because it's an elected position. And you could also make the argument that too much power is vested in one individual, and that he gets to do whatever he wants, comes and goes when he wants, hires who he wants for his department, without necessarily having any discussion or controls from other people in town.
Right, and to Bob's point, I mean, that's for me, it's the oversight thing, as I opened up about the reporting. Right. And in being elected, even though you report to the voters, I mean, the voters don't come in there and ask questions. I mean, I don't think they're inclined to, or would they? Whereas, again, with an appointed, they would go to the Board of Selectmen, they would have meetings, the public could go and ask questions, ask for reports, and expect to receive them. Whereas now, I don't think that, I don't think that happens, and it's not inclined to happen.
Now, I'm going to ask this question carefully, because I want to make sure that I get it right. So, I don't want to get into conspiracy theory or anything like that, but part of the argument from the other side is that this change, it goes back to the last point of, making it under the Board of Selectmen, and even if the Board of Selectmen, as it's composed right now, was not, interested in interfering, I think there's a concern among some people that this is a step towards more consolidated control of town government. As not necessarily going towards a city model or anything like that, but more a step in that direction. When I talked to the other side, they brought up, that this is part of a process of kind of moving the town and consolidating power just in the Board of Selectmen and town administrator.
Well, I would like to respond that it was
Yes.
Brian who recommended that the hiring be done by the Board of Selectmen. When he started the initial contact, I think when he came before the Government Review Committee,
Yes.
that was his issue. He said, I'd rather have the Board of Selectmen do the hiring for this particular position. So I don't see conspiracies everywhere, but
I don't either.
We can have a discussion about whether the Earth is flat or if we've ever gone to the moon. But and I'm being sarcastic, and I don't mean to make light of it. But I think that's an argument you make when you don't have a lot of other arguments to make. There's no conspiracy. If I'm on the Board of Selectmen, I want to hire someone that's going to make me look good. I'm not going to hire a friend of my cousin's because he needs a job and then have us all look silly and foolish. I don't see that happening at all.
When this came up the last time before town meeting, when the selectmen put it forward, I think a lot of people, a lot of town meeting members voted against it, and overwhelmingly, because they thought, well, Brian he's in the position, and it looked as if it was a political move.
Right.
He wasn't ready to retire, but the selectmen were putting this forward. I know I was one of those who voted against that. And when Brian came to government review and said, I'm retiring, I thought, oh, this is the ideal time to do this, because we know you're not going to be here forever. You know, everyone wants to retire at some point. And so this is a really good time for us to move on this before it could be next year. Brian says, well, now I'm really ready to retire, and then we have to have have another election for a 2-year term, and then go through the whole process. Whereas the timing was, just right, and as soon as almost as soon as he said he was retiring, the Board of Selectmen started working on it. So it's I think it's a good thing, because I think that we really don't want to risk our bond rating and future financing, especially with all of the projects that the town is looking forward to. We really don't want to risk our financial future on someone who might be elected who has absolutely no experience, just because they have a war chest and they win a popularity contest. And I think that's really the key thing that people need to think about. It's the town's financial future.
All right. Well, that's all.
Did you feel comfortable asking the question the way you did?
I think so. I mean, I think it's a conversation that's out there. That's been started since the Government Review Committee, I think, was formed. That there's people are trying to make changes to how Burlington is run, and so
Well, change by itself is not a bad
That's
thing.
right.
Right.
Right, and I'm all in favor of us keeping our current structure, although I think that this is such a professional position that it needs to be hired from among a select group of well-qualified candidates. I'm a real supporter of town meeting, and will never.
Right.
I will fight to the death to keep us that way.
I know we've got 2 town meeting members
There you go.
right here.
And how many times did we have to say that at government review? We're not changing the form of government, just making some tweaks.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
Well, we've just about a minute left. I'm out of questions, but any final points that anybody wanted to make?
I think we touched on a lot of the things. I think it's an important thing that we absolutely need to have the discussion, and we need to have the vote, because I think the town's future financial situation is at stake. I don't gamble. I don't even do scratch tickets, and I don't think I want to gamble this kind of thing away on the idea that we're doing something wrong by asking to have this appointed.
Right, and again, qualifications, credentials, experience. Right now, you just have to be at least 18 years old and be a Burlington resident.
That's it.
That's it. I mean, really, for this sort of position, I just think that we need someone with qualifications and, like I said, credentials and experience to handle it.
All right. Well, very good. Town meeting members Sally Willard and Eileen Stickler and Selectman Bob Hogan, thank you very much for coming on and sharing your views. I appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, BCAT.
Thank you.
All right. Perfect. So there you have the arguments for making the change. We go now to my conversation with the no to making the position appointed side and keeping it elected. I was joined by former town moderator and current Ways and Means member Phil Gallagher, and the man who has been at the position for over 4 decades, treasurer tax collector Brian Curtin. Let's take a look. Welcome back. I'm now joined by 2 of the representatives of the Vote No on the Ballot initiative. We got the current office holder, treasurer tax collector Brian Curtin, and we've got Phil Gallagher, who is a former selectman, former town moderator, and current Ways and Means committee member. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me here today.
Well, thanks, Rich. One clarification, we're not part of an organization,
Right.
any kind of a formal organization. We're just here expressing our individual opinions.
You are on the side.
Right.
Okay.
I'm on the no side, yeah.
On the no side.
Right.
All right. So let's just start, start broad, I guess. What is, I guess, your biggest concern about the potential change from having this position be elected to appointed?
Well, I think that the independence factor, Rich, is a big part of why I guess I'm opposed to having this position be appointed. Since the beginning of town government, it's been an elected office for the town. And that person that's elected by the residents answers to the residents. I have, obviously several responsibilities, but one of the main ones obviously is reporting to a town meeting, to the officers of the town, to the residents, in handling the collection of over $150 million of town funds, real estate taxes, personal property taxes, motor vehicle excise, water and sewer revenues, and the investment of those funds. The town is not a small business any longer, it's a large business. And I think that the independence of having that person elected as opposed to appointed by the executive office of the town creates the independence that's needed for the handling of all those important responsibilities, like the management of the funds, collection of the funds. I also am responsible for managing all the town benefits, health insurance, life insurance, retirement funds, etc., dental, and issuing 1099s and handling the payroll for the entire town payroll, all employees, school and town, which are well over 1,000. With part-time, we're up to like 1,500 to 2,000 W-2s we issue annually. So, I mean, there's a lot of responsibility there, and I just think the independence of having that person live in Burlington, care about, the town, as opposed to somebody that's appointed that could not live in the town and not, reside here and care about the operations of the town. I'm not saying that person wouldn't, obviously. Hopefully they'd select somebody that's qualified to do that, but I just still feel very strongly about, after doing this position for 42 years, that it should remain independent and elected by the residents.
Well, just as a point of fact, Brian actually defeated the Board of Selectmen's appointment to the treasurer's position back 40 years ago. So the voters expressed their opinion then. But this is about balance of power and checks and balances. In the 1977 reorg, 3 positions were maintained to be directly reportable to the town voters: the town accountant, the town treasurer, the keeper of the public record, the town clerk, and the moderator. The treasurer is the last independent financial reporting body or member that is solely responsible to the voters. If you look at the selectmen, they have 21 committee appointments through the town administrator. They also have the town auditor, the town accountant, the budget analyst, and then over in the other executive board, you have the finance director and the business manager. So all of these people are essentially reporting to the executive. So are you going to get independent information from them, or are you going to get from them what will maintain their job security is based on what their bosses want? I doubt very much that we're going to see the town accountant at the Ways and Means Committee or at town meeting say, oh, hey, the Board of Selectmen is wrong, or the town administrator is wrong. Where you can frequently have the treasurer stand up and say, look, this doesn't make financial sense. Now, the argument that we're going to get somebody more qualified via the appointment process versus the elected process is specious at best. In order to be elected in this town in an independent position, you have to go through an 8-week gauntlet before the voters. You have to get your name on the ballot, 150 signatures. You have to advertise. You have to go on TV. You have to be interviewed by BCAT. You have to put your qualifications out into the field. So this is kind of a slap at the voter, really, that out of the 900 people in Burlington that are in the census that are in the financial services category, we can't find somebody, or a couple of those people aren't going to run for this position. That's nonsense. And look at the appointment process. The appointment process is not infallible, particularly in a position like this. You're not going to get the most qualified people to apply for this job because they're afraid that they'll be exposed as applying for a job in another another community, and we'll put them at odds with their existing people. And we can look at a couple of different examples of recent note. I mean, the Recreation Commissioner or Director, he got fired. He was an appointment. Most recently, Town Council lasted less than a year, and after although it hasn't been said publicly, after the Beer Works fiasco where the state overturned them, they had to end up getting rid of him. So, and even our current town administrator was not, he's an experienced town accountant, yes, but he did not run a community individually previously. So there's no guarantee, and actually less of a guarantee, that you'll have exposure to the voters and to the people who should be making this decision if you have an appointment versus you have an election. An election is likely to be expose far more experience, knowledge, and temperament than a cloistered group who recommend 3 people who then get interviewed for 15 or 20 minutes before the Board of Selectmen.
Now, I think my role in this is, I have obviously no side in it, but in order to, I would probably put the questions that, the other side would have to you, and then I'll do the same to them in that interview. So, first off, you talked about, the independence of the treasurer being important. I just want to ask, as the treasurer for the last 40 years, how often do you have to disagree with the Board of Selectmen or the town administrator on financial matters? Is there a lot of back and forth, or is it more of a cooperative effort?
Well, you try to be a team player, obviously, and I have, I think, been a team player. But as Phil said, there are many times where I might disagree with, a perfect example might be the OPEB funds, which is the town puts money away for future retirees, health care costs that is a liability that we have to pay for current and future retirees. So many times in the operating budget every year, they are concerned about whether or not they're going to have funds for what they consider to be the department's increases, raises, negotiated settlements, all that. I mean, it's part of what town meeting votes. But, we know that liability exists. I as treasurer, feel that the more we can fund that liability currently, the less it's going to cost the town in the long run. I think that they don't see the big picture sometimes. They only look at the annual problems. The same with, obviously infrastructure. My job is to borrow money to pay for all the bonded debt, and I'm supposed to be as well in the bylaws. Any long-term or large expenditures, I'm supposed to be the chairman of that committee. It just hasn't worked out that way always, but
because they don't want you to be.
Exactly. But, that person, the treasurer, is responsible for borrowing the money that town meeting votes on any, obviously infrastructure improvements to the town. Whether it be new schools, new fire station, new DPW garage. And many times, my job is to say that, there's a better way of funding that. It's less expensive to the town. We borrow short term, maybe for a year, to fund certain aspects of that project, but we won't bond that project until the interest rates are such that we'll save a lot of money in interest. So that's the responsibility of the treasurer to make those recommendations. Many times I have disagreed with how we do that with maybe the Board of Selectmen and or the town accountant or a town administrator. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens. And I think that's the
on
difference.
things that matter a great deal.
When you're talking about a lot of money, $150 million, as I said. But, the town, fortunately, we've been financially very successful. We have a AAA credit rating. I'm not taking responsibility for, that entirely. I think I've had something to do with it. We have a 99% collection rate in taxes. I mean, all those things add up. Fortunately, we've got a great business community that's obviously in a great tax base that's funded our, success, as well as good management. We've had great management. But I think, the independence of this office is important in that management structure.
So if I'm hearing you right, the ability to kind of make long-term decisions that are beneficial for the town far out, but might not be quite so popular short-term because of the cost.
Exactly.
checks and balances. Now, this is coming from a couple of different places. Well, obviously, Brian had talked about retirement, but remember, he had to stand before the voters 13 separate times during his career. So, that's where checks and balances come into play. If, the previous treasurer was defeated, okay? It's unlikely an appointment is ever going to be defeated, unless, of course, he disagrees with the selectmen and what they've informed him position to take. But it's coming out of this government review committee, which the argument, of course, that people are making behind the scenes is, look, if the town voters are apathetic, town government is not efficient, we need to have more appointments rather than the election process. And I'll give you a perfect example. The business community and some members of the Board of Selectmen are not pleased with the planning board. They think that, it's too difficult a process to go before the planning board, and it's not as efficient as it could be, and we disagree with some of their decisions. Well, government is not supposed to be efficient. It's supposed to be effective, and it's supposed to follow the rules which are applied. It's too bad if the business community or the Board of Selectmen don't like the planning board or the Board of Health's positions. They're elected to the people, by the people, to render the decisions to the benefit of the people, not to the benefit of the Board of Selectmen or the business community. So there's a classic example. We haven't seen their recommendations, but you can be assured that there's going to be more appointments for the Board of Selectmen, more consolidation of power, less control by the people. And I'll give you another example. At the Ways and Means Committee on Town Administrator Petron's last meeting, his comment was, we've got to get rid of either the fall or the winter town meeting because it's too much trouble. So, it's too much trouble to appear before the legislative body of the community and present ideas and legislation. It's too much trouble to do that. So, again, this is more of an effort to consolidate power within the Board of Selectmen and the town administrator.
Another point, Rich,
Yes.
just to elaborate on something that Phil was getting at, is that, the people that are in favor of an appointment feel that they're not going to get a qualified person. And Phil's already laid out that I think we have several qualified people that live in the town that would be interested in the position in the future, I think. But if by chance that somebody was elected that, did not work out for some reason or another, the selectmen have the authority to have that person removed from office.
So does the state.
Absolutely. So, it's not like that person would, if they were doing something incorrectly or were not performing to, efficiently in the performance of their duties, that person can be removed as an elected official. Same as an appointment, you could be fired. There's still a process there. So I think their fear that once they're elected, they're there forever. That's not the case, and especially not in Burlington.
There's 8 full-time employees within the treasurer tax collector, all who have a great deal of experience during this period of time, during Brian's tenure. And also, just as the town administrator stayed on to mentor the new town administrator, so too would the treasurer stay on to mentor the new treasurer. And there's also, not only can the selectmen do it, not only can the state do it, but town meeting and the voters can remove the treasurer prior to any election via the recall process. So, and as far as the pool of candidates is concerned, once again, Town Clerk, keeper of the public record, gave me the census results. The number of people in the financial business is over 900, and a community like Burlington, which is burgeoning with all kinds of quality professional people. And the other point I would make about that is that every organization in the state, every single organization in the state, whether it's corporate, whether it's government, or whether it's nonprofit, has a treasurer. So there is an abundance of people that throughout the state that are qualified to handle money and the job description of this position.
Well, the state treasurer is elected.
Exactly.
I think one of the concerns, however, is, I understand what you're saying. If the wrong person's in there, they can get removed from different process, but that would be a process and there would probably be disruption. I think the issue, I know you are trying to play it off a little bit, Phil, but, if we look at the last, handful of town elections, I think one of the issues is we do have low voter turnout. We do have low participation. There's a lot of races that go uncontested. I mean, we have school committee right now, 2 incumbents just going to get put back in because there's no challenger. Isn't
Yeah,
there
but they
a
also
concern?
have 100 years of experience in
Sure,
that
but
position.
isn't there a concern that somebody, just could put their name on, get their name on the ballot, probably run maybe without an opponent, and just get voted in as, people go to vote for their, favorite selectman and they just check the box?
Well-
Isn't there a concern that because voter turnout and public participation has been low, that, it would be somewhat easy for somebody without the qualifications just to kind of get put in there as sort of like a down ballot vote?
Well, that's true. That has happened. I mean, look at the moderator position. Was in for 2 years, removed the Ways and Means chairman, 4 members of the chairman that had, 4 members of the committee that had 80 years of experience, 75 years of experience, and was replaced by somebody who had lived in the town for, one of them was 11 months. But within 2 years, that problem was solved by the electorate. And as far as low voter turnout is concerned, the lowest I think we've recently had was somewhere in the order of 1,500 votes. 1,500 voters, and as high as 4,000 and 5,000. What would you rather have, a cloistered group of 3 or 4 people in a search committee, or maybe 8 people, than small, short-lived interviews, or would you rather have 1,500 people in an 8-week process selecting the individual who actually lives here? And remember, the bulk of these people who are in these appointed positions in management within the town are not residents. So, I mean, they have responsibility to their appointing authority. And given a choice between the voters and the appointing authority, the ones who they rely their job on, in which way are they going to lean in their decision-making process? And that's what happens when you get this consolidation of power, and you can see it in larger cities. Fewer and fewer people make decisions, therefore there's more and more opportunity for control by a small cabal of people, and more possibility of corruption. We've essentially been corruption-free for the last 45 years. I think we've had 2 or 3 instances within positions, 2 I think, that have had a problem that required legal action. So I think the selection process by the voters for a position who is responsible only to the voters should remain elected.
Now, so you talked about, the cloistered group from a search committee, but isn't there an argument to say that, a search committee would at least get resumes, would at least have like a deep look at a number of candidates, whereas voters, they might turn into, a BCAT debate, for example, but they might not, even though it's a smaller group of people, it's a more deeper look.
Well, it's not a deeper look, actually. When you talk about running for election, you've never run for election in a contested election in Burlington.
That's
so what
true.
it requires is anywhere between a $1,500 and $7,000 budget, depending on how hotly it's contested. It requires door knocking, which you can see Priest and Hogan and Hartling are doing that now. It requires a mailing. Okay, it requires a fundraiser. It requires road signs and coffee parties in which you have to go to explain to the individual voters what your positions are. Letters to the editor, articles, endorsements. So it's a much more vigorous process than an appointment process. And I can tell you, having been on the board and made the mistake, in 1986, I was on the board. I was part of the search committee for town administrator, and we had very few applicants. We went through the resume process and the interview process, and then we had the full board spend 20, 25 minutes interviewing the candidates that were recommended. And 2 years later, we had to fire them because it was a terrible decision. So there's no guarantee in the appointment process you're going to do any better than the voters will do.
And I know that one of the big arguments for the other side is just that, as Brian sort of outlined at the beginning, the budget when you started was, in the 20 million area,
Yes.
and now it's well over
150 million.
150.
Yep.
Yeah, but don't forget, his salary was $10,000 at that time too. So everything is relevant, okay? Relative, not relevant, relative to what the times were. We were the fastest growing community in the nation when he got the job. fastest growing community in the entire nation. So let's not make a comparison that somehow Burlington is so much more advanced and mature now than we were then. We had far more problems then that he had to deal with than we have now. We have contamination, we had teacher strikes, we had lack of buildings, infrastructure problems, sewer problems, water problems. So let's not make that argument that somehow we're more sophisticated and much more difficult to manage now than we were during the period of the 70s and early 80s. That's nonsense.
I think there's more money to handle and that kind of thing, but the responsibilities are relatively the same. You obviously, and I agree. To me, it's the democratic form of government. It's about democracy. It's about answering to the people who pay the position, and they have a say in what happens, and that's the clear difference in my mind.
So I think another thing that you had mentioned is, the independence of your position allows you kind of to plan out, things like OPEB, which,
Yep.
I think most people, well, I don't want to say that most people, I think a large amount of people think that it's, a prudent thing to do, but it always gets pushed back every
Right.
town meeting.
Right.
That's
That's only one example. I mean, other examples can be, Rich, that, one of my responsibilities is collection of taxes and so forth. I mean, there are several businesses in town that, have personal property taxes and whatever. If they don't pay their personal property taxes, we shouldn't be issuing licenses to them. The selectmen have the authority to issue those licenses. I send a list to the selectmen every year, actually almost every quarter or every 6 months, to let them know if there are businesses that aren't paying their taxes, and those licenses shouldn't be issued. Now, the selectmen have the authority to issue. They can issue that license. And if I work for them and they said to me, hey, we're going to issue this license regardless. It hasn't happened, fortunately.
Don't produce your list. Yeah.
But it could, and, there's interference. I don't answer to them because they don't appoint me. I obviously answer to the voters. I care about the money being collected, that they should be paying their taxes. That's a small example. Same with the management of the funds. They have a friend that works at a bank. They want to do business with somebody else. My job is to make sure we get the most competitive interest rate, and I invest the money soundly so that the town gets the most, return on their investment. I mean, they could tell me that, I want money to be put in this bank. I want it to be invested with this investment company. There's no interference with any of those with having the position be elected, because I answer to the residents, and I don't get reelected if I'm not doing my job, obviously. So hopefully that's why I've been here for 42 years, because I think I have done the job the way it should be done.
Well, let's look at a parallel as well.
Sure.
One of the other positions is the town clerk, which effectively is the keeper of the public record and the archivist. So minutes and various things, and voter registration and clean voter, by the way, and the integrity of elections and things of that sort. Would you want those things under the control of the people who, would like to have that control in order to alter positions or alter results or alter the minutes? Or do you want somebody who's independent, who reports directly to the voters, and in many cases, calls the various public officials and says, hey, you're doing this wrong, and it has to be done this way. It has to be done this way, and you're going to do it this way. So that's the quality of independence.
That's the independence.
That's independence and checks and balances against the primary power structure.
All right. Well, I think you've made a strong argument, and you've, even before I asked a lot of the questions, you sort of tackled some of the points that are going to be raised by the other sides. So you saved me some time and effort there. I didn't even have to ask.
It should be interesting how the voters vote on this, but
Well, I'll give you one
we're
parting
obviously
comment
against
for
it.
those. There are many, many people in the town who watch BCAT now. As you know, all of our government meetings are on BCAT.
Yep.
You've got a BCAT Facebook page, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Multiple.
The electorate in town that shows up to vote is informed.
Yes.
And knows what they're doing. So I would keep an eye on this government review committee, which is dominated by either the business community or the Board of Selectmen and the power structure. Wait and see what they come out for recommendations. Are they going to want to do away with town meeting? Are they going to do away with independent treasurer? Are they going to go to recommend a town council? not a town council legal, but a
Like a city council structure? Is that
yes,
what you're
yes, city
trying to-
council, that type of thing. Because it all boils down to reducing the number of people that are in the decision-making process. Government is not meant to be, and democracy is not meant to be efficient. It's meant to be messy with a lot of different points of view, and finally consensus achieved after that messy process. Efficiency does not make for good government.
All right. Well, you've heard that side. We'll have the other side on as well. No matter how you come down, I think everybody should turn out on April 6th here in the Burlington High School in the gymnasium to let your voice be heard. Thank you, gentlemen, both for coming on. Treasurer Tax Collector Brian Curtin and former Selectman, former Town Moderator, and current Ways and Means Member Phil Gallagher. Thank you both.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you, Rich. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. So there you have it, the arguments for and against changing the Treasurer Tax Collector registration from elected to appointed. I'd like to thank Town Clerk Amy Warfield for giving us the basics and all the representatives from each side for coming in and sharing their views. A reminder that the Burlington Town election will be held on Saturday, April 6th, and polls will be open in the Burlington High School Gymnasium from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Absentee ballots are also available, and absentee voting can be done in the Town Clerk's office until noon on Friday, April 5th. Thanks for watching this edition of BNews In Depth, and we'll see you next time.